What happened in Lancaster on June 20th, 1837 challenges everything historians thought they knew about Victorian England's most respectable families. The official records were sealed for over 90 years, but the truth about the Blackwood sisters became the subject of the most disturbing case study ever documented in Lancashire's criminal archives. In the summer of 1837, just 3 weeks after 18-year-old Victoria ascended to the British throne, for women orchestrated a night of terror so calculated and brutal, the authorities questioned whether such systematic evil could emerge from Britain's emerging middle class. This channel is only for those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of our history, because what investigators discovered in that Georgian house on Penny Street would shatter every assumption about sisterhood, loyalty, and the true nature of Victorian propriety. The Blackwood sisters didn't just commit murder. They weaponized respectability itself, using their social status as camouflage for crimes that would have shocked even the hardened criminals housed in Lancaster Castle's notorious dungeons. And when the smoke cleared and the truth emerged, one sister had vanished into the expanding British Empire, carrying secrets that may have claimed dozens more victims across 2 continents. The year 1837 marked a turning point in British history. Queen Victoria's coronation had ushered in an era of moral reform and social respectability that would define the next 60 years. Lancaster, an ancient city dominated by its medieval castle and the winding River Lune, embodied this transformation perfectly. Once a rough frontier town known mainly for its prison and public executions, Lancaster was rapidly becoming a respectable commercial center where Victorian values flourished. It was into this world of rigid social hierarchy and moral certainty that Eleanor, Margaret, Catherine, and Blackwood had been born, the daughters of Samuel Blackwood, a successful wool merchant who had made his fortune during the Industrial Revolution. The sisters occupied the highest levels of Lancaster society. Their Georgian mansion on Penny Street, with its elegant facade and carefully maintained gardens, represented everything the new Victorian era aspired to achieve. Eleanor, at 32, was the undisputed head of the family following their father's death 3 years earlier. Tall, severe, and possessed of an intellect that intimidated even Lancaster's most educated gentlemen, she managed the family's extensive business interests with ruthless efficiency. Margaret, 28, served as the family's social coordinator, maintaining their connections with Lancashire's most influential families. Catherine, 24, had received the finest education money could buy and spoke 4 languages fluently. And the youngest at 20 possessed a beauty that had made her the most sought-after eligible woman in the county. But beneath this facade of Victorian respectability, something far darker was taking root. The sisters had discovered that their social status provided the perfect cover for activities that would have horrified their contemporaries. They had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation, using their charm, intelligence, and connections to build what would later be recognized as one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in British history. The scheme had begun innocently enough. After their father's death, Eleanor had discovered certain irregularities in the family's financial records, irregularities that suggested Samuel Blackwood's fortune had been built on more than successful wool trading. Rather than report these discoveries to the authorities, Eleanor had seen an opportunity. If her father could bend the rules to build wealth, why couldn't his daughters use those same methods to preserve it? What started as minor document falsifications and strategic bribes had evolved into something far more sinister. By 1837, the Blackwood sisters were operating a network that extended throughout Lancashire and beyond. They specialized in solving problems for wealthy clients, problems that conventional legal remedies couldn't address. Inconvenient witnesses could be discredited or removed. Compromising documents could disappear. Rival businessmen could find themselves facing mysterious setbacks that destroyed their enterprises. But as the sisters' network expanded, so did the number of people who knew their secrets. By the spring of 1837, for individuals had become dangerous liabilities that threatened to expose the entire operation. The first was Thomas Hartwell, the family's longtime accountant. A meticulous man in his 50s, Hartwell had been managing the Blackwood finances for nearly a decade. But his attention to detail, once an asset, had become a liability when he began questioning certain transactions that didn't align with legitimate business activities. Eleanor had tried to satisfy his curiosity with partial explanations, but Hartwell was too intelligent and too ethical to be fooled indefinitely. The second problem was Mary Watson, a former servant who had worked in the Blackwood household for 2 years before being dismissed for alleged theft. The theft charge had been fabricated. Mary's real crime had been overhearing conversations that revealed too much about the sisters' true activities. Since her dismissal, Mary had been asking questions around Lancaster, trying to clear her reputation and expose what she claimed to know about her former employers. The third threat came from an unexpected source, Reverend Samuel Pierce of Lancaster's St. Mary's Church. Pierce had been approached by Margaret Blackwood with what appeared to be a simple request: to backdate certain baptismal and marriage records to help resolve an inheritance dispute for one of the family's clients. But Pierce had recognized the documents as forgeries and had begun his own investigation into the Blackwood family's activities. The fourth and most immediate danger was James Morton, a young gentleman from a respectable Yorkshire family, who had courted in Blackwood for several months before their engagement was abruptly broken. Morton's crime had been falling genuinely in love with and beginning to ask questions about certain aspects of her family's business that didn't make sense to his honest nature. When Anne had rejected him on Eleanor's orders, Morton had threatened to expose what he called irregularities in the Blackwood enterprises. By June 1837, Eleanor had reached a chilling conclusion. All 4 problems would have to be resolved permanently, and they would have to be resolved simultaneously to prevent any of the targets from warning the others. The plan Eleanor devised was breathtaking in its audacity and horrifying in its precision. She would coordinate 4 separate murders, each carried out by a different sister using a different method, all timed to occur within a single hour on the night of Lancaster's annual summer festival. The festival, a celebration that filled the city streets with revelers and distractions, would provide perfect cover for their activities. Eleanor assigned each sister a target and a method based on their individual strengths and the specific circumstances of each victim. She would handle Thomas Hartwell herself, using a combination of digitalis and arsenic that would simulate a heart attack, a believable fate for a man of Hartwell's age and sedentary lifestyle. Margaret would deal with Mary Watson by arranging what would appear to be an accidental drowning in the River Lune. Catherine would eliminate Reverend Pierce using a silk cord and her knowledge of anatomy to ensure his death looked like suicide by hanging. And, despite her youth, would be responsible for James Morton, creating a fire that would consume both the evidence and the victim. The coordination required for such an enterprise was staggering. Eleanor spent weeks studying the movements and habits of each target, identifying the optimal time and location for each killing. She established a communication system, using lamp signals from the windows of the Penny Street house, allowing her to coordinate the timing down to the minute. Most crucially, she prepared alibis for each sister that would place them in public view during the crucial period, making it impossible for any single person to be connected to more than one death. But Eleanor's plan required more than just tactical brilliance. It demanded a level of emotional detachment from her sisters that revealed the true depth of their moral corruption. She was asking Margaret to drown a woman she had known personally for years. She was ordering Catherine to strangle a man of God who had baptized children they knew. She was commanding and to burn alive a young man who had genuinely loved her. And remarkably, not one of the sisters hesitated to accept their assigned role in what would become known as the Night of 4 Deaths. June 20th, 1837 dawned clear and warm in Lancaster. The city was alive with preparations for the summer festival, an annual celebration that brought together residents from throughout Lancashire for a day of music, dancing, and traditional games. The festivities were scheduled to begin at sunset and continue well past midnight, filling Lancaster's narrow streets with crowds that would provide perfect cover for the sisters' deadly scheme. Eleanor spent the day making final preparations, reviewing each element of the plan with her sisters and ensuring that every detail had been anticipated. She had arranged for Thomas Hartwell to visit the Penny Street house at precisely 10 o'clock that evening, ostensibly to discuss some urgent financial matters that couldn't wait until morning. Margaret had convinced Mary Watson to meet her at the old stone bridge over the River Lune at 10:30, claiming she had information that would restore Mary's reputation and help her find new employment. Catherine had scheduled a late evening meeting with Reverend Pierce at the church rectory, supposedly to discuss a substantial donation the family wished to make, and had arranged to meet James Morton at his lodgings at 11 o'clock, suggesting she had reconsidered his marriage proposal. As evening approached and the festival began, Each sister took her position for what Eleanor had grimly dubbed their final performance. At exactly 10 o'clock, Thomas Hartwell knocked on the door of the Blackwood house on Penny Street. Eleanor received him in the family's elegant parlor, offering him brandy and discussing business matters with her usual calm professionalism. Hartwell had no reason to suspect that the drink contained enough poison to kill a horse, carefully measured to ensure his death would appear natural while occurring quickly enough to keep him from crying out or fleeing. The digitalis began affecting Hartwell's heart within minutes, causing chest pains and difficulty breathing that he initially attributed to anxiety about the financial irregularities he had discovered. By the time he realized something was seriously wrong, the arsenic had begun shutting down his organs systematically. Eleanor watched with clinical detachment as the man who had served her family faithfully for a decade died in agony on her Persian carpet, his final words a confused plea for help that would never come. Meanwhile, Margaret was implementing her own deadly assignment at the River Loon. She had met Mary Watson at the appointed location, expressing what appeared to be genuine remorse for the young woman's dismissal and the false accusations that had destroyed her reputation in Lancaster. Mary, desperate for vindication and unaware of the true extent of the Blackwood family's criminal activities, had followed Margaret to a secluded section of the riverbank where they could speak privately. Margaret's method was more direct than Eleanor's poison. Using her superior size and strength, she had simply pushed Mary Watson into the fast-flowing river and held her underwater until her struggle ceased. The festival noise from the city center masked any sounds from the struggle, and Margaret had carefully chosen a location where the current would carry the body downstream, making it appear that Mary had fallen in accidentally during the celebration. Catherine's assignment required more finesse. Reverend Pierce was an intelligent, suspicious man who would not be easily deceived or overpowered. Catherine had spent weeks studying his habits and vulnerabilities, finally settling on a plan that would exploit his trusting nature and his dedication to his pastoral duties. She arrived at the rectory claiming to be in spiritual distress, seeking guidance about a terrible sin she had committed. Pierce, true to his calling, had welcomed her despite the late hour and listened with genuine concern as Catherine spun an elaborate tale of guilt and remorse. When she asked if they could pray together, the unsuspecting clergyman had knelt beside her, closing his eyes in reverent concentration. The silk cord Catherine had brought was strong and thin, perfect for her purpose. Pierce had only seconds to realize what was happening before the cord tightened around his neck, cutting off his air supply and his ability to call for help. Catherine, using techniques she had studied in medical texts, applied pressure to specific points that would render him unconscious quickly while ensuring his death would appear to be suicide by hanging, while her sisters carried out their assignments and was completing what was perhaps the most challenging task of all. James Morton was young, strong, and alert, and unlike the other victims, he was specifically suspicious of the Blackwood family and would have to convince him to lower his guard completely before she could implement Eleanor's plan, and arrived at Morton's lodgings at the appointed time, appearing distraught and claiming that she had defied her family to come to him. She told him that she had discovered the truth about her sister's activities and would prepare to help him expose their crimes, but only if he would agree to leave Lancaster with her immediately. The story was compelling enough to overcome Morton's suspicions, and he had begun making preparations to depart when it made her move. The fire started in Morton's bedroom while he was packing his belongings, and had used a combination of lamp oil and chemical accelerants to ensure the blaze would spread quickly and burn hot enough to destroy evidence. Morton had only minutes to realize that the woman he loved had betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible before the flames consumed both him and any proof of the Blackwood family's extensive criminal enterprise. By midnight on June 20th, 1837, for people were dead in Lancaster, and the Blackwood sisters had returned to their Penny Street mansion to await the inevitable discovery of the bodies. Eleanor had calculated that it would take at least 12 hours for authorities to find all 4 victims, and several days before anyone began connecting their deaths. By then, she planned to have destroyed any remaining evidence and prepared the family's defense against whatever suspicions might arise. But Eleanor had made one crucial miscalculation. She had planned for every contingency except the possibility that someone might witness one of the crimes directly Constable William Ashton was 26 years old and relatively new to Lancaster's police force, but he had spent enough time patrolling the city's streets to know when something wasn't right. During his rounds on the night of the festival, he had noticed several unusual activities that individually might have been coincidental, but together formed a disturbing pattern. He had seen Margaret Blackwood leaving the area near the River Loon shortly after 10:30. Her dress wet despite the dry evening, and her normally perfect appearance disheveled in a way that suggested recent physical exertion. He had observed Catherine Blackwood hurrying away from St. Mary's Church around 11 o'clock, moving with the quick, nervous steps of someone fleeing a scene rather than leaving a casual visit. Most significantly, he had witnessed in Blackwood in the vicinity of James Morton's lodgings just before the fire started, and her reaction to the flames had struck him as oddly calm for someone watching a building burn. When the bodies began turning up the next morning, Ashton was the first to suggest that the deaths might be connected. His superiors initially dismissed the suspicions. After all, the victims had died from completely different causes in separate locations throughout the city. But Ashton had noticed something that the other investigators had missed: the precise timing of each death, all occurring within a 60-minute window, despite the different methods and locations involved. As the investigation progressed, Ashton's suspicions began to focus on the one element that connected all four victims: their relationship with the Blackwood family. Thomas Hartwell had been their accountant. Mary Watson had been their servant. Reverend Pierce had been approached by them for questionable services. James Morton had been romantically involved with in Blackwood. But Ashton's most disturbing discovery came when he began researching the Blackwood family's history more thoroughly. What he found suggested that the four deaths on June 20th were not the beginning of the sisters' criminal career, but rather the climax of years of increasingly bold activities. Over the previous 3 years, at least 6 other people connected to the Blackwood family had died under suspicious circumstances. A business rival had suffered a fatal accident when his horse was spooked by an unknown chemical irritant. A former client who had threatened to expose certain irregularities had committed suicide by jumping from Lancaster Castle's walls. A servant who had asked too many questions had died from what appeared to be food poisoning, but showed symptoms consistent with deliberate poisoning. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. The Blackwood sisters had been systematically eliminating anyone who posed a threat to their criminal enterprise, and they had been doing it with a level of planning and coordination that suggested genuine expertise in murder. But Ashton's investigation had not gone unnoticed by its targets. Eleanor Blackwood possessed an intelligence network that extended throughout Lancaster's social and commercial circles, and she had learned about the young constable's inquiries within days of their beginning. Her response was characteristically direct. William Ashton would have to join the growing list of people who knew too much about the Blackwood family's secrets. The attempt on Ashton's life came on July 15th, exactly 3 weeks after the night of 4 deaths. Eleanor had arranged for him to receive an urgent message requesting his immediate presence at a warehouse district near Lancaster's docks, supposedly to investigate reports of smuggling activities. The message appeared to come from a superior officer and was delivered by a street child who disappeared immediately after handing it over. Ashton arrived at the specified location to find the warehouse apparently empty, but his police training had taught him to be suspicious of situations that seemed too convenient. Rather than entering the building directly, he had circled it first, looking for signs of recent activity or potential ambushes. His caution saved his life. Through a window, he observed Margaret and Catherine Blackwood position themselves with weapons. Margaret with a pistol, Catherine with what appeared to be a crossbow. The sisters had planned to kill him as he entered the warehouse, then dispose of his body in the River Loon, using the same method Margaret had employed on Mary Watson. But Ashton's discovery of the ambush provided him with something he had been lacking throughout his investigation: direct evidence of the sisters' criminal intent. Rather than confronting them immediately, he had withdrawn to organize a proper arrest with sufficient backup to overcome their obvious willingness to use violence. The raid on the Penny Street house occurred at dawn on July 16th, 1837. Ashton had convinced the superior to authorize a search based on his evidence of the attempted murder, and what they found exceeded even his suspicions about the extent of the sisters' activities. Hidden throughout the elegant Georgian mansion were the tools and records of a criminal enterprise that had operated for years. Poisons, weapons, forged documents, stolen goods, and detailed records of payments received for various illegal services painted a picture of systematic criminality that shocked even Lancaster's experienced investigators. But the most disturbing discovery was found in Eleanor's private study, a ledger that recorded not just the 4 murders committed on June 20th, but detailed plans for eliminating at least 6 additional people who had become problematic for the family's operations. Constable Ashton's name appeared at the top of the list, followed by a superior officer and several prominent citizens whose only crime had been asking inconvenient questions about the Blackwood family's activities. The sisters' reactions to their arrest revealed the different personalities that had made their partnership so deadly. Eleanor remained calm and defiant, refusing to show any remorse for her actions and challenging the authorities to prove their case in court. Margaret appeared resigned to her fate, asking only that she be allowed to write final letters to distant relatives who had been unaware of the family's criminal activities. Catherine broke down completely, alternating between hysterical sobbing and attempt to blame her older sisters for corrupting her moral nature. But in Blackwood was nowhere to be found. A search of the house revealed that Anne's belongings were missing, along with a substantial amount of money and jewelry that had been kept in the family safe. Servants reported that they had not seen her since the previous evening, and none of the family's neighbors could recall observing her departure. Eleanor's reaction to news of her youngest sister's disappearance was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire case. When informed that Anne had apparently fled, Eleanor had smiled for the first time since her arrest and made a single comment. "The child always was the smartest of us all." The trial of the 3 remaining Blackwood sisters began in Lancaster Castle's Crown Court on September 15, 1837, and immediately became the most sensational legal proceeding in Lancashire's history. The courtroom was packed daily with spectators who came to witness what newspapers were calling the most shocking case of female criminality in British legal history. The evidence against Eleanor, Margaret, and Catherine was overwhelming. In addition to Constable Ashton's testimony about the attempted ambush, prosecutors presented the detailed records found in the sisters' house, testimony from surviving victims of their previous crimes, and forensic evidence that connected them to multiple murders. The defense strategy was equally remarkable. Rather than denying the charges, the sisters' attorney attempted to argue that they had been driven to their actions by circumstances beyond their control, specifically the corrupting influence of their father's criminal activities and the pressure to maintain their social status in an era when unmarried women had few legitimate options for supporting themselves. The argument failed to sway the jury, but it did introduce evidence that suggested the Blackwood family's criminal activities extended back at least a generation. Samuel Blackwood, it appeared, had built his trading fortune through a combination of smuggling, fraud, and intimidation that would have made him one of the most successful criminals in Lancashire if he had lived to face justice for his actions. Eleanor, Margaret, and Catherine Blackwood were convicted on multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. The sentences were carried out at Lancaster Castle on November 3, 1837, before a crowd of nearly 5,000 spectators who had gathered to witness the execution of the 3 women who had terrorized their community. But even as the 3 sisters faced their final moments, questions remained about the fate of Anne Blackwood and the true extent of the family's criminal network. Eleanor had refused to provide any information about her youngest sister's whereabouts, taking those secrets with her to the grave. The mystery of Anne Blackwood's escape has fascinated historians and criminologists for over 180 years. How had a 20-year-old woman with limited resources and no criminal experience outside her family's enterprise managed to disappear so completely from Victorian England's increasingly sophisticated surveillance systems? The answer may lie in the extensive network the Blackwood sisters had built during their years of criminal activity. Their clients had included some of Britain's most powerful and influential people, individuals who had their own reasons for wanting the Blackwood family's secrets to remain buried. It's possible that Anne had received assistance from these connections, people who preferred to help her disappear rather than risk exposure to their own involvement in the sisters' crimes. Records from Liverpool's docks show that several ships departed for America, Australia, and India during the weeks following Anne's disappearance, but passenger manifests from that era were often incomplete or deliberately falsified, and Blackwood could have boarded any of those vessels under an assumed name, carrying with her the knowledge and skills that had made her family's criminal enterprise so successful. What happened next may never be fully known, but there are disturbing hints in historical records from several British colonies that suggest Blackwood may have continued her criminal career in new surroundings. A series of unexplained deaths in Sydney, Australia between 1840 and 1843 involved victims who had been poisoned, drowned, or killed in fires, methods that matched the Blackwood sisters' preferred techniques exactly. Similar patterns appeared in criminal records from Bombay, India in the late 1840s, and in police reports from New York City during the 1850s. In each case, the crimes involve a young woman of refinement and education who had gained the trust of wealthy victims before killing them for financial gain. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from records discovered in the 1920s during renovation of a mansion in San Francisco, California. Hidden behind a false wall, investigators found documents that belonged to a woman named Anna Blackwood, including detailed plans of murders that had occurred throughout the American West during the 1860s and 1870s. The documents suggested that Anna Blackwood had built a new criminal network even more extensive than the one her family had operated in Lancashire, taking advantage of the chaos and lawlessness of America's frontier period to eliminate dozens of victims across multiple states. The methods described in these documents showed a level of sophistication and planning that could only have come from someone with extensive experience in systematic murder. If Anna Blackwood was indeed in Blackwood of Lancaster, then her escape from justice may have enabled her to claim more victims than her three sisters combined. The true scope of the Blackwood family's criminal legacy may extend far beyond the 4 murders committed on that June night in 1837, encompassing a trail of death and destruction that spanned 2 continents and multiple decades. Today, the Blackwood case remains officially closed, but its impact on criminal justice continues to influence investigators worldwide. The systematic nature of the sisters' crimes, their use of social respectability as camouflage, and their coordination of multiple simultaneous murders establish patterns that modern law enforcement agencies still study when investigating organized criminal enterprises. The Georgian house on Penny Street, where the sisters planned their crimes, has long since been demolished, replaced by a modern office building whose occupants remain unaware of the dark history beneath their feet. Lancaster Castle, where the 3 sisters were tried and executed, now serves as a museum and tourist attraction, but visitors are rarely told about the most shocking case in the fortress's long history of criminal proceedings. But perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Blackwood sisters is the questions their case raises about the nature of evil itself. How could 4 women raised in comfort and respectability develop into cold-blooded killers capable of murdering childhood friends, trusted servants, and innocent clergy? What transformed daughters of Victorian propriety into architects of systematic terror? The answer may lie in the recognition that evil rarely announces itself with obvious signs or dramatic revelations. Instead, it grows gradually, hidden behind familiar faces and respectable facades, protected by social assumptions and community trust. The Blackwood sisters succeeded for years because no one could believe that women of their status and education could be capable of such systematic cruelty. Their story serves as a reminder that the capacity for evil exists in the most unexpected places, waiting for the right circumstances and opportunities to reveal itself. In 1837, those circumstances came together in a Georgian house on Penny Street, and 4 sisters discovered that respectability could be the perfect disguise for the darkest of human impulses. The case remains unsolved in one crucial respect. The fate of Blackwood continues to challenge investigators more than 180 years after her disappearance. Somewhere in the vast historical record of the expanding British Empire, the truth about the youngest Blackwood sister may still be waiting to be discovered. Until then, her story stands as one of history's most haunting mysteries, a reminder that some secrets are so dark that they can vanish entirely, leaving behind only questions that may never be answered and crimes that may never be fully accounted for. The night of 4 deaths changed Lancaster forever, but it may have been only the beginning of a criminal legacy that extended far beyond the ancient city's medieval walls. In the shadows of history, Blackwood may have continued the deadly work her sisters started, claiming victims whose names and stories will never be known, whose deaths were never connected to the elegant young woman who had learned the art of murder in a Georgian mansion overlooking the River Loon.